Okay, I must begin saying it's really good to be here. Every time I've been here, things turned out really well. The weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold. The pastor was great, the audience was great, they bought a lot of books. Everything went really well, so it's great to be here. And talking today about an issue that is now before us more and more, and that is the issue of abortion. And there's been a lot of false information about the issue of abortion, which I will hope to correct. The reason that so much false information is out there is because we have advanced enormously medically, and now we can get really good pictures of the infant in the womb when he or she's only a month or actually a few weeks old. And so that has really changed things drastically. In fact, many clinics which look at the pro-life position, one of the main tools they use is a sonogram. They buy sonograms there and they say, would you like to see a picture of your baby? And you know, who can say no? They show a picture of the baby, and right there, many women change their mind against having an abortion. And so they end up saving the child. So we found technology is one of the greatest saviors there is for the children. A few words about some of my other things. This is a book. People always ask, why in the world do you write a book about God, Eisenhower's life, military career, and presidency? Well, to summarize this book, World War II was a war between two worldviews, creation and evolution. And thank God, creation won. Because if evolution won, we would all, if we were here, of course, this is a Lutheran church, so we're okay, we'd be speaking German. We'd be saying, sprechen Sie Deutsch? Sehr good, ja. Sprechen Sie, nein, not good. Anyways, that is the theme of the book, and I spent, of course, a couple hundred pages developing that and showing indeed that Eisenhower's belief was we are all children of God, we're all created by God, we're all descendants of Adam and Eve, therefore we're all equal. The Nazis' philosophy was we are not all equal. Some races are superior to other races. The superior races are the Aryan race. The inferior races was just about everybody else, including the Slavics. What's the big problem? Because there are a lot of Slavics in that area, and they killed, we're often not aware that they killed about 6 million Jews, but they killed about 6 million Slavics as well. So he was very concerned about elimination of a lot of races except the Aryan race. So if you're German, specifically Northern German or Scandinavian, you'd be okay. But the rest of you wouldn't be here. And that's not very good, and that was a major concern Eisenhower had. He said once, I hate war only as one who has been in the middle of it, but I hated the Nazis even more. And so it's a part of Eisenhower that is rarely talked about. In fact, when I wrote this book, usually when I read a book, it's accepted by publisher first time, second time, third time at the latest. But this book was turned down like 20 times. And I kind of gave up, and I had Andrew Goodpaster, who took Eisenhower's place as the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. And he called me up, and he said, you must publish this. It is clearly true what you have to say. In fact, I dedicate the book to him, stating that if it wasn't for his phone call, I probably would never have published this book. So indeed, and by the way, everywhere I've spoken, I've sold out. So I brought a whole big pile, so hopefully I won't run out. And this is another book called Poor Design. One of the strongest arguments for evolution today is the human body is poorly designed. And that's just wrong. And it's ironic that I taught anatomy for many years at medical school, and that's just wrong that people believe this, because when you study the Bible, you realize how incredibly well it is designed. It's just not true. And the arguments they use for poor design are simply absolutely wrong. It's the only book that published by anybody that takes that position. This is one called Useless Organs. There was for a century claims that numerous organs in your body were useless, like the appendix, the tonsils, the adenoids, the coccyx, and about 100 others were claimed to be useful. And now we know from research that every one of them have either an important function or a very important function. So that argument is gone. And the last one is Fossil Forensics, which is the only book that covers, in general, the fossil record from mollusks to humans, all the way down the line. And so therefore it shows indeed that there is no fossil evidence for evolution for any major group of animals. And that's just a false argument. And I sell them, by the way, from my cost, which is I order 100 at a time. So I get a discount, and I fill up the garage with books, and my wife complains. Well, what do you do? She says, hey, that's what you do. So I guess you wives, we really ought to appreciate you gals. I don't think we do as much as we should. Right? Is that true? We really should appreciate what you do for us. Because I know, well, I wouldn't have the garage if my wife didn't give me permission and fill them full of books. But we need to appreciate. And you guys, when you leave today, let your wife know you appreciate her. Okay? That's important. Okay, and so I sell them for 12 for 1 and 2 for 20. And anyone who buys any book gets one of these free. This is kind of the Reader's Digest version of my vestigial organ book. So if you buy any book, you get this one free. Okay, back to my presentation. And I find it helps when I explain what my books are about, because people look at it and say, fossil forensics, what's this about, dead people? What's this about? So, okay, these are 2 others. My Hitler book has always been the bestseller, and I talk about how incredibly influential Darwinism was in Hitler's ideas. Hitler got his ideas. He didn't come up with these. He didn't make them up. He got his ideas, which started World War II, from the professors who taught the ideas that I'm refuting today. And then Darwin's corrodes morality. I talk about, well, gee, things like abortion. If evolution wasn't believed, the Supreme Court would have never ruled against the laws that prohibited abortion. The Roe v. Wade would have never been made, because we now see that indeed abortion is killing another human being, as I'll talk about. The Darwin effect gets into some of these ideas. Eugenics, racism, communism, capitalism, and sexism were all critically important critically influenced by Darwinism, as I show. And I've spent about 1/3 of my family is black, so I'm very aware of that issue. And so as I read more and more about Darwin, I realized how critical his ideas were in the problem we had and still have in this country today. And it may surprise you to know that Washington, Lincoln, Jefferson, and so on were all creationists, and they stressed all men and women are descendants of Adam and Eve. Therefore, all brothers and sisters. Therefore, you cannot be racist, because we're all children of God. He stressed that. Well, how did all the problems relative to slavery come about? Later, thanks to Darwin. And that's well documented in a book that I hope will be out soon. But that's getting far afield, and this is Evolution: Blunders, Frauds, and Forgeries, and one of them I'll be talking about today. Charles Darwin's goal. His goal was, and I just did a paper on this, to murder God. And to do this, he had to replace the reason people believed in God. When you ask people why they believe in God, they say, well, look at the beauty of the creation. Look at the trees, the sunset, the animals, the life around us, the dogs, the cats, all light. Look at your body. That proves there's a God. And of course, that's what the scriptures say. The heavens declare the glory of God. And Darwin knew that. And so he wanted to murder God. To do that, he had to come up with another explanation for the creation. That explanation was evolution. And by coming up with evolution, his exact words were, it's like committing a murder. And I wrote the paper of that, and one of the reviewers disagreed and said, well, that might have been true, but you better document it. So I added a couple more pages clearly documenting that, indeed, that's what Darwin meant. He wanted to murder God, and he wanted to destroy Christianity. That was his goal, very clearly. And the scriptures, now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. Obviously, from this scripture, it's clear that from conception on, you have life, you have a child of God. And there are many other scriptures, which I won't go through, since you probably know most of them, but it's interesting, there's a little typo error here, I just did this last night. If when you kill, you have to know it's not life. People say, well, I'm not sure if it's life. Well, then the solution would be you don't abort. You should not abort until you know clearly this is not life. Okay? And then a survey, Stephen Jacobs in German it's pronounced, asked, I had to learn German for my doctorate, by the way, so I've forgotten most of it, but I can still say simple things like Wie geht es Ihnen and Es geht mir gut bitte and other things, so I can get by until you get too complex and then I get lost. Well, it's been 30 years since I did my doctorate, but anyways, he asked several thousand PhD biologists, and about 90% were, another mistake, 90% were pro-choice. 90% were pro-choice, about. And he asked them when life began. And about 95 said at fertilization. And yet they were pro-choice. So the biological world accepts the fact that, indeed, life begins at fertilization. But yet, most of them were pro-choice. And there you can see a chart detailing this. And by the way, this was a fellow from this area. He got his a law degree, and then he went back to school to get his PhD at the University of Chicago, one of the most eminent universities in the world. And for this thesis, they turned him down. And he had to fight. Well, he is a lawyer. I guess that's why he became a lawyer first. And he went to court and he says, look, you cannot find anything wrong with it. But we don't like the implications. Well, that's neither here nor there. The fact is, the vast majority of biologists, and you can go into more detail if you look him up online, the vast majority of biologists agreed with the fact that at conception, you have life. And each human being, and this is another scripture, I think, from each human being, too, I demand an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed, for in the image of God, God has made mankind. And Genesis 9, 5, and 6, you shall not murder. And Exodus and Romans mention that. And do not put an innocent person to death. And of course, one of the strongest arguments against abortion is they're innocent. And I'm working on a novel, which I think is a pretty good novel, but it's based on several true cases. And it's about a woman who was raped by gunpoint. And to make it more complex, she was white and the rapist was black. Okay? And she wondered, should I abort this? All her friends said, oh yeah, abort it. She talked to her Lutheran minister and he said, well, what do you think? What's your thoughts? And she said, well, the child's innocent. He did something wrong. It's a problem, but the child is innocent. He said, well, then go according to your conscience. So she had the child, and the child was a beautiful little girl. Didn't have to go to the beach to get a suntan. So everyone loved the cute little girl. And the little girl in the story, the little girl said once when she was about 4, Mom, what happened to you? What do you mean what happened to me? Did you fall in some bleach? You're so white. What happened, Mom? Well, we'll talk about this later. But anyways, it turned out this story, I think, helps people get into the fact that even during rape, and by the way, vast majority of rapes does not conceive a child. Studies have shown the vast majority of rapes, the father is the husband. And there are many reasons for that, which I won't go into here, but vast majority of rapes do not result in a conception. But the story goes, and my story is this one did. And it really is a story which helps us understand in more detail, not only the child as a result of rape, but also the complexities that revolve around these situations. Okay, Roe v. Wade in 1973, the United States Supreme Court ruled a woman has a constitutional right to an abortion during the first trimester of pregnancy. Now a number of states have said up to the time of delivery. And that's gotten a lot of press because they're hinting that not only before delivery, but also after delivery. So that's a concern. And states still are allowed to regulate abortions during the second trimester and prohibit it during the third, but now it's, in some states, it's acceptable during the third trimester. And abortion Roe v. Wade, the argument used was, it's not murder because when the abortion is usually performed, the human embryo is not a human. Rather, it is a fish, and you probably know where that came from. And the number estimated now about 45 million in 1995 alone worldwide. So it's the major leading cause of death now in this country. We're very concerned when during the past week, we had 2 shooters who shot, 22, I think, and 9. So we're, for good reason, concerned about that, but yet how many people are concerned about abortion? And there we can see fetal growth, 9-week, 12-week, 16-week, 20, 24. When do you say it's no longer a human? Some people might say, well, here. Well, no, right here. Well, no, right here. It's arbitrary. The most consistent definition is from day one. And to me, that doesn't look like a fish. And now we have photographs, many photographs, and this would be 13 weeks. And this, as I mentioned, the ultrasound photographs have been a major factor in changing people's mind relative to abortion. And at 13 weeks, now that's not the best picture. Actually, there are others that are better today, but I didn't have time to search them, and I'd have to get ones that I can have permission to use. And they're about 4 weeks. Clearly a child. It's not a fish. And you have to be blind to say that was a fish. And they're 9 weeks and then 16 weeks. And again, there are better pictures, but this is good because you can see the face. In fact, you can tell certain characteristics of the face even at 16 weeks. And there you can see twins at 9 weeks. And no question, it's a human. And their embryo at 18 weeks and 4.5 months. And you can see, again, the details are enormous. And again, they have better pictures now. But I just couldn't get my hands on it. Okay, since 1980, about 1.5 billion induced abortions occurred, increased from 50 million annually during the 1990s to 1994. It's going down for a number of reasons. But nonetheless, it's still a major problem. The cause of death in the United States, number 1 is abortion, 2 is cancer, 3 is heart disease, and 4 is other abortions. So for other purposes. And they've declined significantly for a number of reasons, which I won't go into. Abortion is a greater cause of death for African Americans than heart disease, cancer, diabetes, AIDS, and violence combined. About 40 to 50% of all African American babies are born each year. And if you know much about Margaret Sanger, who I have a whole chapter on, she wanted to reduce the inferior races. And one way she felt to do that would be abortion. That's why most abortion clinics in her day, as well as today, are in minority neighborhoods. Because that reason, she was pretty open about that. And Dr. Gudea Neal, he was a professor at University of Michigan, and he argued at the Supreme Court case, he argued that evolutionists have proven early embryo passes through the stage in the evolutionary history of our species. At about 30 days after conception, the developing embryo has the gill slits and the gill arches of a fish. It has a caudal appendage, the tail, and in many textbooks of human embryology, it's there. A leading scientist at University of Michigan, one of the most prestigious colleges in the world, and he basically argued before the Supreme Court that during the time of an abortion, when it usually occurs, they're a fish, or it's tissue. It's not a child. Now today we know that's wrong. And it's widely known that's wrong because we know that these embryo pictures they used to prove this were forgeries, which I have a whole chapter on in one of my books. And therefore if they're informed about what's going on, they would no longer argue this. And so therefore this would not pass. I think if the abortion case were before the Supreme Court today, I think that they would rule the opposite. I don't think you would have abortion kicking around our heels today. And there is Jim Neal, and he was an honored physician the head of the American Journal here, American Journal of Human Genetics, a cover picture in honor for what he did in introducing the information to the Supreme Court, which was a factor, if not an important factor, that caused them to rule against the rights of children. Here's the pictures, and you've probably seen these before. These are Haeckel's, Ernst Haeckel, who, by the way, influenced Adolf Hitler a lot. His work did, at least. And you can see here the pictures. And at this stage, you can see they try to make them look like they are, well, less than human. In fact, as we see, these are Haeckel's fake drawings, and these are the real embryos. Now, Haeckel, I'll show you some pictures. He was a really talented artist. I doubt if anyone in this room, I might be wrong, but anyone in this room had nearly the talent that he had in art. So you can't tell me he just didn't see things clearly, because this is what he saw. We know that because that's what it looks like today, and this is what he drew. That's a forgery. Okay, it's not a distortion. Well, it's a great distortion. It's so great it's a forgery. And you can see all the way along here. And when we look at studies, this is a study done by Haeckel's embryos. Images, Evolution, and Fraud. Excellent study. It's about, I don't know, 600 pages, lots of pictures. And he shows in detail, indeed, that this was a forgery, even though he was an evolutionist. And you can see that there are differences very early, major differences, and they become more alike at this stage and then less alike as time goes on. And so what Haeckel did is pick the stage that they were more alike than the earlier or the later stages. That's what he did. Haeckel was quite a guy, by the way, if you read about him. And anyways, you can see these were his first stage, and these are the actual appearance, and these, of course, what they develop into. And it was wrong about the gill slits, of course. You don't contain gill slits. They're not there. They never were there. They're not gills there. They're pouches which facilitate development of other structures. And right here, we don't have a tail either. So sometimes it looks like people do. And sometimes when they're born, they have what looks like a tail, but it's not a tail in the sense that animals have tails. And here we can see the different stages of the embryo development. Now, during the first day, of course, it doesn't look much like a child, obviously. But how many women know they're pregnant the first day that they are pregnant? How many women know that? Some might, but quite often they don't know it until, first there's often denial. Couldn't be pregnant. I use birth control regularly. I couldn't be pregnant. Or I use other methods of contraception. Well, we know that those other methods, even birth control, is a certain percentage of failure. I don't remember what it is, but I think it's about 2% failure, which is not too bad. But on the other hand, if you have sex 100 times, where's our mathematicians here? 2% failure, 100 times sex, you're going to end up sooner or later with what they call a condom baby. Okay? And so a woman is pregnant and doesn't know it. So by the time she's sure she's pregnant, we're talking about over here, we're talking about development has proceeded to the degree where it's clearly a child. And so now some women know earlier, but many women don't know exactly when they got pregnant. They just know that, gee, I am now, and the doctor says it looks like I got pregnant 2 months ago. Okay, and this film was excellent, unplanned. If you can show it in your church, it's not gory. It explains what's going on, does a very good job. It's extremely tactful. You can even bring kids there. But they do bring out, for example, when they do an abortion, especially by curette, they have to make sure they got all of it. And they have to count the arms and the legs and so on to make sure they got all the parts. Because if there's one arm and 2 legs and all the other parts are there, there's an arm left in there and they got to go back in and get the arm out. So they do mention that, but on the other hand, it was really well done. And here's one other, Gosnell, excellent. It's obviously pro-life, but on the other hand, they do a really good job tactfully explaining what happened. And by the way, I read the story of this person, and the film is really accurate. And they really stuck close to actually what happened. And it's a well-known, America's biggest serial killer. It's a well-known case. So, excellent. Now, there's Haeckel as a young man and as an older man. And there's some of his drawings. Could anyone in here draw from life drawings like that? I sure couldn't. I couldn't even get close. So he was a good artist. So don't tell me, well, you know, a little bit of distortion there. It was more than a little bit of distortion. It was forgery. And there was an animal named after him, and that was originally, they thought it was an animal, believed to be the source of all organic life. It was a link between inorganic and organic life. And eventually it was determined to be what? Just a mineral precipitation. And I thought I have another talk on Haeckel, and I talk about what a precipitate is. Abortion techniques. Okay, abortifactants, pharmaceuticals, and they put chemicals in there which burn the baby. And they actually cause a severe burn, and it kills the baby, and then it's delivered. It's rejected. And the concern has been, can the baby feel pain? And again, if you're not sure, assume the baby can. And so a concern is when the abortion occurs, is the baby going to be suffering in pain? And I guess, to be honest, we don't know for sure. There's some indication they do suffer pain. But on the other hand, you don't assume they don't unless you know for sure they don't suffer pain. And then surgical abortions, vacuum aspiration. You basically vacuum it out. You pull it out. And they have a vacuum which is 27 times stronger than a home vacuum cleaner. And it's done only during the first 3 months because otherwise the baby's too large to do this. And therefore that's a problem. But during early stages, it can be pulled out. And the problem with all of these techniques is what? What's the main problem? Hemorrhaging. And what data do we have on that? Well, not much, because when the mother dies as a result of abortion, it's often not recorded as caused by abortion. They'll say hemorrhaging, cause of death, massive hemorrhaging. And they won't go into detail as to why. And so we don't have accurate details. And part of the reason is that there are so many people who are emotionally connected to the right from a woman to control her own body, that they just can't deal with it. And by the way, I should mention that the baby is not part of the woman's body. In fact, one big question, I just pulled an article out which I brought. One big question is why doesn't the mother reject the fetus? Because it's not part of the mother's body. And sometimes the mother will reject the fetus because the fetus has DNA combination of the father and the mother, and therefore the mother's immune system will say foreign, pathogenic, bad, reject it, which they sometimes do. Okay, so it's not part of the mother's body. It's a parasite, to be specific. It's living in the mother, but it's not part of the mother. It's separate. And so that argument is just simply not true. But this is a very emotional issue, today especially, where women want to put their career first. And when you're pregnant at 18, kind of messes up your career. And therefore, women want to be able to choose to abort, because that way they can continue their career. And so that's why it's emotional. Someone was telling me about, who was it? About, they had mentioned that she was taking a class, and they mentioned in the class that the procedures for abortion, and she mentioned this to somebody else, and they kicked her out of the class. And you hear that. I got in trouble at the college where I taught now I tactfully presented this, but I didn't want to lie to students. But on the other hand, you really can't honestly convey the pro-choice position with a straight face. You either have to lie or be ignorant. I wasn't ignorant. So the college didn't appreciate my presenting this information here. Okay, saline, that's salt, or they use some salt solution. They inject that with amniocentesis needle into the amniotic fluid. The baby breathes and swallows and dies about an hour later of acute salt poisoning. And we know that's a horrible way to die. The mother then delivers a dead, burned baby. And the use is declined because the dangers for the mother, and sometimes the baby does survive. So we have some cases where the baby survives. And that was the situation with Gosnell. The baby survived, and of course, the doctor can be sued. Because you went to the doctor for an abortion, you have a baby, that's a lawsuit. As driving over here on the turnpike, I noticed how many ads were for lawyers. You have a motorcycle, somebody hits you, we'll sue for you. And so how many ads? So, it's a way lawyers can make money. I mean, lawyers make money by suing. So that's a major way they make money. And so therefore, what Gosnell did, and he explained why, which you could understand, if the baby was born alive, he killed it. And that is, my guess is that's not rare. We don't know how common because that's not recorded. And that's why in some states, they want to make it legal to kill the baby after it's born, because that would protect the doctor in those cases. And therefore, he wouldn't have to worry about that. And then the dilation, and you dilate the cervix, and extraction, used after 13 weeks when the baby is somewhat developed. And then you dilate the cervix, and then you bring forceps, which look like pliers, and then you seize a leg, you twist it and tear it off, and then you twist off and tear off as much of the baby as you can, and hopefully you get it all out. The skull is a problem because it's large enough where it doesn't go through the cervix very well. So you have to crush the skull and then pull the parts out. And then reassemble them and make sure they've all removed so you don't leave part of the child in the mother's body, which can cause a problem like infection and partial birth abortion. Through the 4th through the 9th month. Use ultrasound to locate the baby's legs so you can then find the parts and pull them out without a major problem. And then scissors I used to puncture the base of the back of the skull to crush it and then to pull it out. Margaret Sanger, talked about her. She was the woman who stressed birth control as well as abortion. And the reason she did is because Margaret Sanger is well known for her many lovers. H.G. Wells and many famous people were lovers of Margaret Sanger. She liked men, which is nothing wrong with that, that's fine. But when you like lots of men, that's a problem. And that was a problem for her, and so she basically campaigned against birth control, for birth control, so that would reduce the problem of children born of this union. But she stressed at the end of her movement was to produce a superior race by evolution. She was an evolutionist. She said she founded Planned Parenthood, which is still around today, and to eliminate what she thought were inferior races. And that wasn't a small category. Orientals, Jews, and blacks were the inferior races. So she had a lot of people to work on getting rid of. And she referred to them as human weeds. Okay? And her father was a village atheist, so she got some of these ideas from her father. She died as an alcoholic and a drug addict, very sadly in the United States, alone and without family. She had 2 children, but she didn't tend to have much time for her children. She was too busy traveling the world, having sex with famous men, and lecturing about eugenics and birth control. Anyways, Sanger charmed the black community's most distinguished leaders into acceptance of her plan, which was designed to their own detriment. Genetically inferior was what she called these people. The need for birth control in America and birth control facts and reproductive in 1995 is the source of this quote. She said such a plan, that called the Negro Project, would reduce the birth rate among the diseased, the sickly, the poverty-stricken, the antisocial classes, elements unable to provide for themselves, and the burden of which they are all forced to carry, or we are forced to carry. And she said the most merciful thing the large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. Okay? We don't want the word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. That wouldn't be good. So that's why they wanted to work through the preachers, through the ministers. And I gave this presentation in a black church a few years ago, and came up to me afterwards, the minister, and said, that's interesting, but I'm aware of that. For example, in a church that he just spoke at, a black church a few months earlier, a woman was pregnant and she wanted an abortion, and so the church raised the money to pay for her abortion. The church raised the money to pay for her abortion. And he just sat there and thought, that's a problem. And so as we all know that not all Christian churches are Christian. And there's a few good churches around here. This is a very good church. So if you attend it, you should be proud. You got two good pastors you had, the previous one and the current one. You have some good pastors to help you understand this stuff. But to me, it's amazing that they should be aware of this, that indeed, this is what Margaret Sanger wanted to do. If they read my book, sorry, they'd be aware of this, because I have a whole chapter on that. And here are some of her words. Actually, we have her own manuscripts. And first step would be to control the morons, the mentally deficient, epileptics. The second would be to take an inventory of such groups as illiterates, paupers, etc., and we need to kill them. Need to get rid of them. And this is an interesting man. He was a Russian scientist, and what he was trying to do was basically prove evolution, and he was trying to do that by breeding a primate, a gorilla or a monkey, and a human. And the argument, by the way, this was 60 years ago, but just last year, Professor Barish, who was at the University of California, said that a human and chimpanzee hybrid could be produced in a laboratory. After all, human and chimp, or bonobos, share by most estimates roughly 99% of their nuclear DNA. Well, the number is closer to 85%, which is a chasm between us and humans. You're talking about almost 500 million genetic differences between humans and chimps. And by the way, it doesn't take much when you look at her and her. I have no problem identifying which is which. I mean, she looks like a girl and he looks like, or she looks like a chimp. So no problem. And they really were thinking about the ethical implications. If we breed this, they call it Hamanzi. If we breed this Hamanzi, do they have human rights? Should we have affirmative action for Hamanzis? How do we treat the ethical implications of this union? And interesting, in one of the German colonies, this scientist wanted to breed, and he wanted to breed the chimps in Africa with the blacks in Africa. And the German government said no. The German government, now this is before World War II, German government says no. We're trying to help the population. We're trying to work with the blacks. The Africans. We're trying to help the population, and this is going to get in between us and what we're trying to do to help these people before Hitler. And so what they had to do is they had to lie. They had to tell the women they were impregnating with the eggs fertilized by a chimpanzee sperm. They had to lie and say they were just doing an examination and just health examination or something. But it may not surprise you to realize that none of them worked. Been unable to breed the two. And this does not stop people from trying. In fact, today they are still trying. Why were they trying back then? Because this would prove evolution. If you can breed humans and chimps, this would prove evolution. And they said that's why. And today they got pretty much the same reason for trying this. Except there are still the major ethical problems. But I don't think you'd ever have a conception that was viable. So you never know, but breeding eagles and apes, and there's Hamanzi, and they combine this. Ivanovich, first person to attempt to create a human-chimp hybrid by artificial insemination, and he outlined the idea in 1910, and he eventually raised the money in the 20s, and Russia helped him raise the money. In 29, he organized a set of experiments which failed, as far as we know. Failed. Kinsey, Professor Alfred Kinsey, the father of the modern Western sexual revolution, he was himself very promiscuous. And I don't want to mention his sexual practices because I don't want to gross you out. I want you to be able to sleep tonight, but they were pretty gross. And if you read a lot about Kinsey, I have a chapter about him in one of my books. If you read about him and his dishonesty, for example, he somehow in his book, he had data on ejaculation, and he claimed that babies could ejaculate as what 3 months, I think? It might be in here, in the book. And he was one of the first real bad perverts. And if I mentioned, well, I'll mention a few of the things that he did. he had sex with many of his students and he would film it. And those films are all in file now at the Kinsey Institute at the University of, Kentucky, or no, University of Illinois, I think. And so very much into pedophilia, among other things. And here's what you can learn from the Kinsey report. And ironically, people believed his data was valid for years. And it's irresponsible. Grossly irresponsible. He made up a lot of the data. He interviewed inmates in the prison. Many of them were in there for sexual offenses. Now, do you think you're going to get a picture of American sexual behavior by interviewing inmates in the prison who are in there for sexual offenses? I don't think so. And his books, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female and the Human Male, came out first. Published, though, by a leading publisher, Saunders, a leading medical publisher. So that gave it respectability, and I don't know why they published it, but maybe he went to Harvard, got his doctorate at Harvard, so maybe they're impressed with that. But anyways, his lifelong crusade. Darwinism is critically important in overturning traditional sexual morality, and we can see this today. I have grandkids. I have 10 grandkids. I have 4 kids. My wife and I, between us, we have 4 kids. And you've seen this in your own family. They start to live together. They have kids. It doesn't work out. And just today we were talking about our kids that they're separating. She got pregnant. They got married because she got pregnant. They had 2 more children. Now they have 3 children. And now they're splitting. And she's got a boyfriend, and he has them for half the time, and she has them for the other half the time. And they have all kinds of problems. All kinds of problems. Well, I hate to... A lot of you people can relate to this. When I was young, I learned you meet the girl, you date her, you get to know her, you get engaged, you get married, then you have kids. You can't tell that to kids today. We just want to see if it works. It works out. You know, like when you buy a car, you can take it home for a week and see if you like it. And if you like it, then you can buy it. They've found, doesn't surprise you, but they've found that couples that live together without the benefit of marriage, the marriages, when they do get married, don't tend to last. A lot of the factor on whether a marriage lasts depends upon the commitment. And the biblical record was, you may find this of interest, the biblical record was, if a guy gets a girl pregnant, he's got to marry her. Or they stone him. Guys, you can think about that twice? More than twice. She's a nice girl, but I don't know. Either marry her or get stoned. I think I'll wait. I think I'll think about this. You want to be sure that you want to spend your life with this girl before you start having kids. Okay. And yet so many of the young people don't do it that way. And so many end up in problems. And I bet in your families, when I present these lectures, I have so many grandparents come up and say, yeah, the reason I'm here is because my grandson or my granddaughter, same situation. They've been married for 2 years, or they're not married yet, and they got 2 kids now, and things are not working out well. We've got a problem. No wonder we have a problem in our society. So anyways, his lifelong crusade was to encourage adultery, fornication, homosexuality, sadomasochism, bestiality, pedophilia, and need I say more. These were all widely practiced, he claimed, from his interviews with the inmates, and therefore they were normal. And that was his basic point, is that 80% of males have sex with another male, so therefore it's normal, so therefore what's the problem? And that's what he argued. And same thing he argued for pedophilia. Well, that's not doing too well today in our country. Never tried, but that's so. It boggles my mind that people could actually accept what he had to say. Well, they accept it because they want to. And there you can see he advocated almost every sexual act possible and a few that you might think are impossible. Okay? These are his own words. The only unnatural sex act is the one which you cannot perform. So he really pushed abnormal sexual behavior. Unfortunately, some of the women are standing up and saying, look, this man behaved inappropriate toward me, and I don't like it, and that's a problem. And now, guys, you're getting in trouble for behaving in ways that you thought were okay. And now maybe the guys will realize that you better treat women nice. Don't start fooling around, because you could end up running for president and end up in big trouble. Plan ahead. If you want to run for office, you better make sure you're clean. I remember when I taught at the college, there was a fellow who was really interesting, and he says, someday I want to run for high-level office, and therefore I really have to watch my P's and Q's in everything that I do now. Because they'll look back 20 years and say, when you were in college, you did this. And that was a problem, so be careful. And there we can see his books again, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And there's another book which summarizes Kinsey, Sex, and Fraud. So his work clearly, Judith Reisman did the main research on this book. And she's a very good writer and basically effectively exposed him and what he did. Kinsey Report Revisited, because he did support pedophilia, even with children as young as a few months old. And it's in his book. And there you go, that's the report here. 5 months. And you can read the 4 years. And probably these were done by inmates who are in prison now for this. But I think number one, it's impossible. Number two, if it was possible, that's a problem. A big problem. So I hope I have helped you understand what's going on. What can we do? Well, get the message out, especially with young people. I have, like I said, 10 grandchildren, and one took a biology class, and basically we talked about this, and he said, we got here by evolution. And I pointed out some of the problems, and I had his book, his biology book, and his biology book said we have all these useless organs, could only be accounted for by evolution. We have the appendix and all these organs have no function. I said, but that's not true. They do have a function. And he went through a number of these arguments, and then basically he said, well, how do you explain how life got here? And I said, now this young fellow was raised in a church. And I said, well, God. And he says, well, I can't believe in that. No. You know, this, to me, that's a better explanation is evolution. And then he got in trouble with his dad for talking about this. And I encourage him to read other things. He reads carefully all his textbooks, gets A's, gets scholarships to go to college, but yet he doesn't read anything outside of his textbooks. And he's only going to get one position in his textbooks. And I was an evolutionist at one time. I went down that same route. And so I understand how they go down that route. But I always read a lot, not just my textbooks, but other books. And therefore, I wasn't fooled like some of these people are. And I find, I have to admit, evolution is really, the evidence is pathetic. It's really pathetic. Apes turn into people? Right. And I've written all these books. I've written, by the way, about 20 books just on this topic, showing indeed that evolution's impossible. It could not occur, it did not occur, and that's the result of science. I have a book coming out shortly, and that is Science is the Doorway to Theism. And that, for me, people ask me why I left atheism and became a Christian. Study science. You study the Word of God written in the world, a natural world. It screams God. It screams design. And I'll give you one quick example, which is silly in a sense, but I was talking about why trees, deciduous trees, lose their leaves. Because otherwise it would snow and it would knock the trees down. It would kill them. They lose their leaves so that when it snows, they stay up. Very simple. And the student raised his hand and said, that's incredible. There must be a God. Very simple example. But when you study science, physics, chemistry, biology, and so on, it just screams there's a God. One of the main issues of contention is the age issue. And that really, to me, is not a problem because science says in the beginning was nothing, and the Big Bang created space, time, matter, and energy. Space, time, matter, and energy. Before that, there was no space, there was no time, there was no matter, there was no energy. Well, creationists believe the same thing, except they believe that nothing created space, time, matter, and energy, but God created space, time, matter, and energy. And to me, that solves the whole issue that creationists often argue about. That before the creation, there was no space. Now, it's hard for us to imagine that. There was no space, there was no time, there was no mass, there was no energy. But that all came about through the creation of, well, if you're an evolutionist, the Big Bang. So nothing created everything. But Christians believe that God created matter, time, space, and energy. And then from that, we have the universe around us. So that, to me, is a non-issue. But I don't focus on that issue because that's not my interest. But it's interesting, when I taught astronomy, I had a lot of films written by well-known, acted by well-known scientists, and they would say in the beginning it was nothing. And then, from the Big Bang, popped into existence time, space, matter, and energy. And here we go. And so that's what we taught. That's what our book taught. That's what I taught. Except in the class, I said nothing created all this. And in church, we say God created all of this. And that's what the scriptures say in many places. So we have time for questions. Where am I at on time? You're such a good audience listening. No one's sleeping, no one's nodding off, and you're laughing at my jokes, and that's always a good sign.